How do each of the characters in Baldi's Basics contribute to the gameplay loop? What do they each provide to the experience on their own and in tandem with the rest of the game? Is Baldi's Basics balanced? Well, by analysing each and every character in both Classic, Remastered and Plus, as of September 2023, this video will deep dive into the gameplay of the NPCs and determine how almost every character can be both a help and a hindrance to the player. Greetings and welcome to Continuity Error. My name is Matt and I'm back with another Baldi's Basics video. Rather than a guide though, this is a review of design, which is more of a video type than an actual series. Regardless, this is a character-focused analysis of Baldi's Basics gameplay. See, I've noticed that after many hours playing, almost every single character is both a help and a hindrance, which leads to some very interesting and dynamic gameplay with characters playing off you, each other, and even other elements of the game itself. Most of the characters are in both Classic, Remastered, and Plus, and are virtually identical in how they function, so skipping over the 3 Plus exclusives at the end of this list, this video should age well for a finished game. That being said though, at the time of this video's release, Plus is still in development and subject to change. I'm talking about hide and seek mode in version 0.3.8, but a new clay animated character has already been confirmed just for the next update, and there could be a dozen more characters by the time the full release happens, so bear that in mind. Not everything I say may necessarily be up to date. I'll pin a comment explaining my thoughts on the new character when 0.4 releases, and if there are lots more new characters by the time the finished game rolls round, I'll redo this video entirely. Anyways, that's enough disclaimers. Let's get into the analysis, character by character, one at a time. Hang on. Number 1. The player. So, you may be a little surprised and or confused to see you, the player of the video game, listed as a character on this list. But before we even get into the nitty-gritty of each character, I need to explain some of the fundamental basics of this specific gameplay loop. And there's our starting point. What is a gameplay loop? Essentially, a gameplay loop is a series of repeating actions that the player takes to play and win the game. These are the core mechanics that the player interacts with at almost all times and often define the genre or even subgenre of the game. For example, in the sit and survival horror game Five Nights at Freddy's, you check office lights, then the cams, and then loop. That repeated motion of checking places where threats can emerge without moving around, that's the defining mechanic of FNAF. Of course, this gameplay loop is not the entire gameplay, as with virtually all games, more mechanics and smaller conditional game loops are added on top to give the gameplay substance, but that basic bare-bones concept is the central gameplay loop that everything connects back to at all times, except in like the menus, of course. Now, this is not to be confused with game loop. I actually didn't know this until I did the research for this script, but gameplay loop is often mixed up with the term game loop. A game loop is the central code of the game, the coding of the gameplay loop. Now, I'm not qualified or experienced enough to talk about states and phases at length, so if you want to learn more about this, do some research for yourself, maybe start with the links in the description. This video approaches gameplay from the perspective of the player's experiences rather than analysing the technicalities of the game's programming. I'm a gamer, not a game dev. But back to the player now. They are the only force of pure helpfulness in the gameplay loop. Yes, you are the player, you control your character's actions, so intrinsically you are motivated and able to win, but beyond the literal real-world player, within the three-dimensional world of the game itself, the player that you play as has the abilities to move around in different directions, different speeds, turn horizontally, and hold up to 5 items, all of which can be used in their own ways to aid you. I could make a whole other video just for items, so for now I'm just going to mention the specific ones that are relevant. The crucial thing is, the player has everything they need to meet the conditions for victory, finding all the notebooks and escaping. And there's the basic gameplay loop of this entire thing. Find notebook, answer math question, collect notebook, and then rinse and repeat until all notebooks are collected. After that, you have to escape via one of the exits, and that's like an additional gameplay loop. But of course, this isn't the entire gameplay. Many more mechanics are added onto the central loop, mainly in the form of the characters on this list. Let's talk about what really defines the heart of Baldi's Basics gameplay: the titular antagonist. Number 2. Baldi. Baldi is the only force of pure hindrance in the gameplay, the antagonist. At no point can Baldi ever do anything to aid you in achieving your goal and thus meeting victory conditions. In fact, it's quite the opposite. His presence introduces a failure condition, a way for you to lose. He exists to balance out the player's helpfulness to themselves within the core gameplay loop. Baldi works pretty simply in concept. He will chase you if he sees or hears you, and if he catches you, it's game over. Of course, Baldi has some quirks that make him less generic. Many of the things you can do, such as opening doors in your search for notebooks, will alert him to move towards the exact location of that noise, no matter where he is. He becomes faster every time you collect a notebook, much faster if you get the math questions wrong, providing a consequence for failing. With Baldi added, if you get the math wrong, you have a tangible threat now, making the game harder than it would have been otherwise, giving legitimacy and meaning to that game mechanic. Imagine if the game was just Baldi and the player alone together. It'd be a bit more bare bones, but from a design point of view, it'd still be a good functional game. And I mean, this is kind of what the speedy challenge is, so it makes a good challenge. So in conclusion, hide and seek features you, the player, a pure force for helpfulness, collecting notebooks before leaving, and Baldi, the antagonist, a pure force for hindrance, chasing you down and ending your run if he catches you. It's that simple, but many small details enhance this relationship. Baldi will detect every sound you make, but because of which sounds he prioritizes, you have the ability, with the right items, to exploit his hearing to your advantage. Of course, speed is always an issue. Take too long answering math questions and he might catch up to you, but rush past without bothering to get them right and he will accelerate drastically. These aspects of the protagonist and antagonist gameplay relationship establish a fair balance that serves as the foundation for the entire gameplay. So with that in mind, let's get into exactly what each character contributes to the gameplay loop. Number 3. Principle of the Thing. Were it not for Baldi, I believe the Principal would be the main antagonist of Baldi's basics. Don't believe me? Launch Explorer Mode in Plus or enable Free Run in Classic Remastered and play the game as you normally would. It's the exact same, but Baldi has been removed, so since you can't actually game over, what's the biggest threat left to impede your progress? Detention. See, the principle of the thing, like most characters, even Baldi when he doesn't have a sound or sight of you to lock onto, wanders randomly around the building. He makes his presence obvious with his whistling, but moves quite fast and responds quickly if he sees you breaking any one of the rules listed on various copies of this poster around the building. If you run, fire a soda, or wander into a faculty-only room in sight of him, it will only be a matter of time before he catches you and puts you in timeout. Even if you have the dangerous teleporter, it will only delay the inevitable unless you manage to complete the entire floor without him spotting you again, which is an incredibly rare scenario. The addition of the rules gives the player more challenging but fair mechanics to react to and fosters better habits for beating the game. It'd be too easy, too dull if you could sprint all the time and use sodas with no downsides, so now there are consequences to these actions if the principal shows up. And that's what makes this really great. You can break the rules. The game doesn't force you to play in a restricted way, since the principal will only show up now and again. He's a temporary passing threat that spices up an otherwise monotonous gameplay loop, which gives the player more to do and more to think about. Both the principal's presence and the rules themselves are signaled to the player early, which makes this mechanic fair, and even the consequence is great. Being forced to sit in a locked room for 15 seconds or longer would be tedious and boring. But the principal's office is arguably the most important room in the game. Nowhere else in the game are each and every character's mechanics actually explained. In this room alone, you can literally read a short paragraph about how every active threat on that current floor works. Not only that, but the principal instantly teleports you. If the detention room is close to a notebook or an exit, and you have the keys to unlock the door early, you can easily trigger the principal to catch you by sprinting for just a second and go there on purpose. You can intentionally put yourself in detention to get away from Baldi and closer to your objectives, which can be the difference between victory and defeat. So hopefully now you see why this video talks about helpfulness and hindrance. The principle of the thing, like the vast majority of Baldi's basics characters, provides an obvious threat with a subtle helpfulness that can be used to your advantage depending on the situation. This is without even mentioning his special interaction with It's a Bully, who he'll get rid of if he catches them bullying you, or how you can deliberately summon him with the whistle, eliminating the randomness of his location and bringing him speeding across the map to you if you need him for one of these beneficial mechanics. With all of this in mind and how much his AI has improved since Classic, I think it's safe to say that the principle of the thing is balanced. This is especially impressive considering how much more he does in terms of mechanics compared to most of the other characters on this list. Number 4. Playtime. Ah, jump rope girl, we all hate you, but in an endearing way. When this annoyance spots you, she'll move towards you at a fairly slow pace, so it's possible to turn a corner and lose her. If she catches you, however, you'll be forced to play with her. Jump rope 5 times, or cut it with some scissors, and you'll be free for a while. It's that simple, and that annoying. Playtime is a randomly appearing threat that, to be fair, is avoidable due to her low speed and loud sounds signaling her presence from a distance, but her mechanic halts the gameplay entirely for a meaningless exercise with no real benefit. If you don't have scissors, and you don't get luckily pushed or teleported away from Playtime by another character, and Baldi is close enough, you're screwed. There is nothing you can do to avoid losing. There have been more than a few times where, despite perfectly timing the jumps, I've been killed by Baldi because I physically couldn't get away. Even with the great improvement of being able to move a small distance while jumping, Playtime is at best a minor hindrance with an okay mechanic. The only possible upside I can think of is that she automatically restores your sprint in the process, but this is possible at any time by just stopping. Sure, scissors are common, so she's often easy enough to deal with, but her mechanic feels like a distraction that simply exists to slow down the player without any real meaning within the gameplay loop. Perhaps if she did something helpful, like offer an item for playing with her, or having an additional mechanic that interacts with another character in a helpful way, I could consider her balanced, but as is, she's just a mediocre hindrance that has zero helpfulness and strays away from the charm of most Baldi's characters with a pointless, dare I say, FNAF-like mechanic that you forget about as soon as it's over. I think Playtime's imbalanced. Number 5. It's a bully. Every school needs one. It's a bully works very differently from most characters. Rather than moving around, he will occasionally teleport to a hallway and block the path, stealing a random item in your inventory to allow you through. This is a simple nuisance like Playtime, but unlike Playtime, it enhances the gameplay. The bully interacts with your items, your inventory, in a way that no other character does. This threat keeps players on their toes. You must either reroute to avoid him, sacrifice whichever item you have to, or wait for the principal to deal with him. There's no one way to play. Multiple solutions offer a variety of strategies that may be more or less favourable depending on the situation, which gives the player more to do, more to think about, and therefore a more engaging game. This is good game design. Even the potentially unfair aspect of this, sacrificing an item to RNG, is a choice the player consciously makes. Really, it's only unfair if the other two options aren't possible in that moment, which is fairly rare. I will admit, it would be good if, instead of pure RNG, bully selected items based on a priority system similar to Baldi's sounds, or at least pick items based on probability, so there's higher chances of certain items and there's a level of predictability about it. This would make him even more fair to the player, but given his interaction with the principal and his fairly rare appearances, I would consider It's a Bully a balanced character. Number 6. Arts and Crafters. A sock puppet that's jealous of your 7 notebooks. Okay, weird character design aside, Arts and Crafters offers a very unique and interesting mechanic. During the main gameplay loop, they are inactive, merely an NPC that moves out of sight when you spot it. Once you have all the notebooks for that level, however, Arts and Crafters will react differently to spotting you for a few seconds. They make an awful noise, rushing towards you and encircling you for a few seconds before teleporting both you and Baldi to an exit. That last detail is what has really improved this character in newer releases. Instead of just being another source of RNG, Arts and Crafters provides a surprise challenge in the final stage of the game. Loudly and visually signaling for a generous amount of time, the player is fairly warned of the teleportation, which itself can be either helpful or a hindrance. On the one hand, Baldi is closer to you, but on the other, you are also closer to an objective. If you manage to finish whatever it is you are doing before the teleport, this mechanic can be very helpful for traversing the map and saving stamina. Hell, you can even recover stamina while waiting for the teleport if you don't need to move. This whole mechanic is almost too helpful to the player. The only times it would hinder you if you were pulled away from an exit and now you had to do them out of the optimal order, but it still guarantees an exit in a relatively favourable position to Baldi. The downside is slight, so maybe Arts and Crafters needs to be given a more annoying aspect or an additional mechanic, perhaps during Notebook Collection, the main gameplay loop. Either way, Arts and Crafters is imbalanced, but they're also the polar opposite of Playtime. Rather than too annoying, they're too useful to the player. Maybe these two need additional mechanics or some kind of interaction to truly balance them both. Or maybe two wrongs make a right? Number 7. Gotta sweep. Gotta sweep, sweep, sweep. You know, I remember this character being like everybody's favorite back in the day, but it just feels like they've been forgotten over the years. Plus, sort of nerfed them by just making the broom so rare, which is probably fair considering how orange-driven this character is. Gotta sweep resides in the broom closet, you see, and at random, will randomly and rapidly sweep the hallways, picking up any characters they run into until they fall off. Gotta sweep is pure chaos. Sometimes they will appear in the nick of time to take you to the other end of the map, away from Baldi, and sometimes they will literally drop off Baldi right in front of you, causing an instant and unpredictable game over. An interesting detail with Gotta Sweep is the fact that, although difficult, it is possible to stay on the broom by moving towards the middle. Given the frequent direction changes of this super speedy brush though, it's very hard to control when you drop off the broom, or if it will circle back around and pick you up again 2 seconds later. Truthfully, this character is basically pure RNG, but that RNG can be just as helpful as it is annoying, and when you have 3 power tubes to spare, the very rare unfair game over from it isn't so bad. I would consider Gotta Sweep balanced in a weird, super random, super rare way that captures the crazy essence of the classic Baldi's basics in a way that, thankfully, no other character really does anymore. Sure, I like my games balanced, but I'll allow this one because the hilarious voice lines and the ironic theme of sweeping brushes cleaning up messes rather than causing them is just such excellent character design. Gotta Sweep is balanced. Number 8. First Prize. First Prize is like a calmer, tamed Gotta Sweep. Slowly trundling around the building, First Prize will slowly turn to face you if you're in his line of sight, and accelerate to incredible speeds, pushing you until it hits a wall or even a window, which it can smash through. And that creates new routes in some modes, and it's a really funky thing I didn't know was a thing until I saw it in a video. I've never actually had that happen to me in the game. Anyways, this creates an obstacle for the player. First Prize can force you far off course from your objectives, and I've lost more than a few times literally by being pushed into Baldi. But this can also be a tool for the player. If aligned in an optimal direction, First Prize can get you massive traversal towards your goals, although the slow turning prevents this strat from being overpowered. So not only is the hindrance balanced, but the helpfulness is balanced, and they're balanced to each other. It's balancing within balancing. What makes First Prize less unfair is the degree of control the player has over it. It will always turn to face you and you alone, and push you only. First Prize doesn't really interact with the other NPCs, apart from being overpowered by Gotta Sweep, but if you have the big old boots or scissors, you can prevent being pushed by it at all, eliminating the potential threat entirely. Failing that, another useful trick is to allow it to go for you and duck into a doorway or a corridor to avoid being pushed by it. Overall, it's a solid, simple mechanic that's fairly easy to deal with if there's a problem, unless there is nowhere to go and you have neither items and Baldi's nearby, which is pretty unlikely or in tandem with each other. It's helpful but not overpowered when the mechanic benefits you. And this is without mentioning how telegraphed the mechanic is as well. The loud noises and the initially sluggish speeds of First Prize mean that you'll never miss him. This is balanced. Number 9. Copter. This is another character that plays with movement, but in a way that's a bit different from First Prize. Copter will randomly move around for a bit, choosing a corridor to stop and blow wind through for a few seconds, and then repeat. Unlike First Prize, this wind affects all NPCs as well as the player, and depending on where you are going and which way Copter is facing, it can either slow you down or boost your speed. This is fairly random, but unless Baldi is close and you don't have anything useful like a bee soda to hand, and there isn't another way out, such as getting put into detention, Copter won't end your run. Even if they slowed you down more often than not, it's a fair nuisance that teaches the player to conserve stamina more effectively or adapt and find a different route. As for Copter's helpfulness, you can use their wind to save or even recover stamina. All NPCs, notably Baldi, are affected by Copter, so although their presence is quite random, the upside and downside of their simple mechanic is equal and it affects everyone equally. Copter's balance. Number 10. Beans. Mix together the annoyance of Playtime, the weirdness of First Prize, and a sprinkle of unique art and voice acting, and you've pretty much got Beans. If you encounter this guy in the corridors of the schoolhouse, he'll begin chewing gum for a few seconds before firing a pink gumball that will slowly fly down the corridor he was facing until it hits a wall or the player. at which point you'll be slowed down for a few seconds, indicated by this visual effect. Then the cheeky bastard will run off, all the time mumbling and singing to himself. Obviously this is more than a nuisance. The massive speed debuff lasts quite a while, so it's a ripe opportunity for Baldi to catch up with you, unless you have scissors to cut the gum off. Beware the covered up HUD though. If you don't remember which slot was selected or where the scissors were, you might have a problem. This is a pretty heavy consequence for getting hit by the gum, but to be fair, it is generously signaled and dodgeable, balanced as a hindrance alone, similarly to First Prize. On top of that though, there is an upside which balances the hindrance with the helpfulness. See, not only can he slow the player down with gum, he can slow anyone down with the gum, including Baldi. If possible, you can intentionally align yourself to try and get Baldi or the principal hit by the gum, and the one thing that none of them will ever have is scissors, so you're guaranteed quite a bit of time to get away from an unwanted NPC. With this in mind, although I find it strange that the principal never says, "No spitting gum in the halls," Beans has a mechanic with heavy consequences that can ruin a run or save it, and for that, I consider it balanced. Number 11. Chalkles. Chalkles resides on a blackboard in a random classroom. Several, actually, at the same time, so it would seem. Once you have entered, it will begin making a noise that gradually increases in pitch and volume, and if you don't get out after a few seconds, it will lock the door, fly off the board, and spin around the classroom loudly alerting Baldi to your location. This takes at least 30 seconds to end, by which time Baldi is almost guaranteed to have caught you. This is the only Baldi's Basics character I genuinely dislike, and I truly believe removing would improve the game. Several things bother me with this mechanic. First of all, it's pointless. Worse than Playtime's game, it's a temporary distraction that does nothing but slow you down, but nobody ever goes quicker because of Chalkles. You're already on the clock for you can think points, Baldi, or just a plain lack of patience. Secondly, the only thing that it does is stop you from lingering in a room for more than a few seconds. It actively prevents a certain playstyle by forcing you out of rooms selected by RNG. It spawns in classrooms only, but which classroom is random. Thirdly, it's just unfair. Locking the room and alerting Baldi to your location for as long as it does, about 30 seconds if I remember correctly, is such a long time to fully remove any agency the player has over their fate and virtually guarantee losing just because you weren't really quick. It's the exact problem the principal avoided, but even if they locked you in a room as useful as the detention room, the mechanic would still suck. So the mechanic is annoying, useless, fails to interact with anything in the game other than forcing you to effectively stop playing and let Baldi game end you, and is way too punishing for what isn't even necessarily a mistake, while preventing certain playstyles at random. That's 5 things. Technically, you could escape using the dangerous teleporter or even the portal poster, but these are rare and expensive items you can only use once, so you're unlikely to waste them on something like this. Chalkles is just horribly imbalanced with no helpfulness whatsoever. At least they're easy enough to avoid. Just don't take too long on the math. You know, exactly like you would anyway if Chalkles didn't exist. Ugh, imbalanced. Number 12. Mrs. Pomp. Did you know that Mrs. Pomp has a heeled shoe for a body? It makes perfect sense considering the sound she makes, but like, I thought that was an eraser for some reason. Anyways, if Pomp sees you, she will rush towards you and freeze everything to speak to you. Then, she'll rush off to her classroom, counting down from 2 minutes, and if you show up on time, she'll reward you with you can think points and simply wander randomly for the rest of the level. If you don't, despite the warnings, then be very careful, because once you enter any room, a surprise will be waiting for you outside. After the double jump scare, Pomp will drag you at high speed to a classroom, forcing you to attend for a few seconds before returning to a passive state. As you can imagine, it's usually pretty easy to turn up to a class, although annoying if it's a room you've already picked up a notebook from. The risk and reward is pretty balanced, since you can still avoid her after the countdown ends if you just don't enter any of the rooms, which may be feasible in the endgame. It's a nice compromised consequence that I'd love to see more from this game, still being able to play if you mess up, but in a restricted way. I've even gotten to Pomp's class before her sometimes, which is always quite funny, but if she catches you, you have no control over where you go for a fair amount of time, and it is completely possible for her to just run into Baldi and kill you immediately. So don't leave it up to chance. Be punctual. I guess the potential helpfulness of this mechanic is dependent on the location of the classroom and limited to some decent high-speed traversal, but given how easy it is to fend them off and the extra you can think points earned from it, the heavy but not game-ending consequence is balanced. I like how Pomp connects to the notebooks. Our whole thing resides in a notebook room, and if you're just going for the exits now, you can still avoid her. Entering a room is a choice, and you as the player have agency as to whether or not the consequences for failure are struck upon you. It's a gamble. Mrs. Pomp is not that helpful, but still very balanced. Number 13. The Test. This eerie mystery character has a complicated but interesting gameplay mechanic, so let me walk you through it. Spawning in a random location on floor 3 only, the test will only ever move if it sees you, speeding towards you at incredible speeds, but only if you are not observing it. The Weeping Angel mechanic. While you are watching it, not only does the test freeze though, but time freezes. All entities will cease movement, even Baldi, essentially giving you the ability to recover stamina and move to a more favourable position while the entire game is paused. So as long as you don't look away from the test, you should be okay. Should you look away while in the test's line of sight though, it will catch you in milliseconds, and for a long couple of minutes, play weird sounds and immerse you in total darkness, as if you have the blindness effect from Minecraft applied. And of course, nothing is paused now. It's pretty much the only thing in the game that's genuinely scary and has a fairly big consequence for dealing with a tough, confusing enemy. But once you know what to do, the benefits are almost overpowered. Freezing time just by looking at it, it's a small and limited bonus, but it can save you from Baldi, and the blindness can be managed by using your quick map with tab. Hell, I hold down tab half the time while playing normally. Like most NPCs, the sounds give you fair notice and warning about this character, so I'd say despite their very weird and creepy behaviour, the test is balanced. I wonder if they'll ever get any updates or changes in future though. Number 14. Johnny. Last but not least, for now, we have the shopkeeper, Johnny. Johnny is completely different to the rest of the characters on this list due to the fact that he exists outside of the main gameplay loop. Instead, he has his own game loop in between floors, selling you items for you can think points. When I said items could be their own video earlier, I really meant that Johnny could be his own video. Johnny is essentially the mechanic which you can use to trade all those you can think points earned from various elements of the gameplay, such as Mrs. Pomp, for a variety of random but often useful items to fend off Baldi and the others. Uniquely, for a higher price, he can also fill out the entire map of a floor, either after a game over or before you even get to that floor, making route planning possible. I suppose Johnny is purely helpful. He always helps the player and at no point is a hindrance by helping Baldi, but that doesn't make him unbalanced. The scope of this video is limited to just characters helpful versus, being a hindrance, which is just limited conceptually, but to judge whether or not the entire gameplay is balanced, I need to bring items into consideration, and I think Johnny could manifest that as his own character in his own video. So I guess I'll make that at some point in future. And with that, we've reached the end of the Baldi's Basics character list for now. Classic Remastered is a finished game, and as a result is really well balanced, although the difficulty is generally much higher than Plus. It's demanding. Plus is quite easy at the moment, but not perfectly balanced. This game is unfinished, so lots of new features and massive overhauls are awaiting us in future, but as of 0.3.8, September 2023, I'd say Chalkles is the only major issue with the character's mechanics, and even then Chalkles is easily avoidable. Some mechanics are unfair in small ways, and unwinnable situations can happen, but my nitpick is about Playtime, It's a Bully, and the rest don't ruin the overall gameplay loop for me. Chalkles is the only thing I would consider just removing entirely. So, thank you all so much for watching. If you made it this far, you must be enjoying the video, so please leave a like and ring the bell to support the content that I produce here. I also highly recommend joining the Discord server, linked in the description with everything else. It's also linked on the banner. There you can chat with the community, get more reliable notifications for everything, and share your own creations too. Subscribe and speculate. How many characters do we think Plus will have when it fully releases?